Welcome to the Criminologist Podcast. Our goal here is to educate and enlighten our listeners, focusing on the latest and greatest evidence-based interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. And not only those factors which drive folks into crime, we also look at the reasons why people exit a life of crime. Also, we attempt to paint an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those involved in the system are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality. This podcast will avoid stereotypes and biases. We will endeavor to accomplish the first two goals in a way that keep you, the listener, interested and even entertained. And now, the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 58 of the Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. In preparation for this week's episode, I knew I wanted to get back to our mock caseload of fictitious felons after a great run of very special guests we've had here on the show. And in reviewing the last couple of client episodes, I was reminded of the fun we had highlighting a desisted Patrick Bateman and a desisted Mia Wallace looking into the future. It then dawned on me to get back to our risk-need-responsivity roots and have a bit more fun by showing you all a client's backstory to illustrate how they got into crime. I figure if backstories work for the Marvel Comics universe, they can work for the criminologist. We talk quite a bit on the show about desistance and how folks exit a life of crime, if you will, but we should not forget, of course, about the acquisition of risk factors, also known as criminogenic need. For if we understand how risk factors are attained, we are much better equipped to understand how they can be addressed. If you are not up to speed with and or need a refresher on risk, need, and responsivity, recall that it is heavily influenced by the work of others, including Al Bandura, specifically Bandura's social learning theory. Again, risk-need-responsivity principles are anchored in what James Bonta and Don Andrews termed GPCSL, or General Personality and Cognitive Social Learning Theory. From their great text, The Psychology of Criminal Conduct, we have that great quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, all behavior is learned behavior, including criminal behavior. For those of you who are well-versed in the principles of risk, need, and responsivity, you are, of course, aware of the alphabet soup of their underpinnings. We're talking about PICR, which stands for Personal, Interpersonal, Community Reinforcement, or the ABC theory of antecedents, behavior, and consequences. They both really talk about the same process. We begin with the antecedents, those things that happen before, such as modeled behavior. And then we, of course, have the behavior itself, and for our discussion, this would be the criminal or delinquent behavior. And then finally, we have the consequence, which could be negative or positive. And once this feedback loop kicks in, this becomes learned behavior, whether it's pro-social or anti-social. Now, with high-risk individuals, these risky behaviors are reinforced over and over and over again over the years, which manifest themselves in long criminal histories and an abundance of criminogenic need. The point being, high-risk clients don't simply wake up one day riddled with risk factors. They don't wake up one day finding themselves as high-risk clients. Again, this takes place over quite some time. To best illustrate, let's look at a prequel, if you will, or a backstory of one of our own clients to see how it all began. Our client, Henry Hill, is now being supervised for the felony offense of fleeing police in a motor vehicle. Let's go back and take a look at that offense narrative one more time. On the date of the offense, the St. Joseph's Police Department observed a tan Chrysler LeBaron, which was exceeding the posted speed limit. Police began pursuing the vehicle in a residential neighborhood in the city of St. Joseph's. The vehicle began accelerating rapidly to an estimated speed of 60 miles per hour. The vehicle then ran a red light and accelerated to over 80 miles per hour. As it approached University Avenue, the vehicle reached speeds of over 90 miles per hour. Additional officers joined the pursuit, and the vehicle stopped prior to crossing University Avenue. The driver was identified as defendant Henry Hill. The defendant emitted an odor of alcohol, had poor balance, and his eyes were bloodshot. When questioned, Mr. Hill acknowledged that he had been drinking, stating, quote, "Yeah, I've been drinking, but I'm not very drunk," unquote. He was then taken into custody and held on a charge related to the instant offense. A breath test was administered, and the defendant had a blood alcohol content of 0.20. Now, loyal listeners of the show may be saying to themselves, we've heard this before. We already know Henry's backstory. And that's the mistake criminal justice practitioners, probation and parole officers often make, is thinking that this is the origin story, if you will, but it's not. This is not really where it began for young Henry. If we peek at his risk assessment, we're big fans of the level of service case management inventory, or the LSCMI here in the show. We would see that he scores high in those domains or that risk area of alcohol and drug. But again, that phenomenon did not happen overnight. Now, we could do this with all 8 criminogenic areas of Henry's risk assessment, but for now, let's just focus on that high risk area within alcohol, drug for illustrative purposes. Let's hop in the time machine to reverse engineer this risk area for Henry Hill. We begin by asking, what was the sort of stimulus condition for young Henry? What was modeled for young Henry? Well, in Henry's house, there was always a party going on. Henry's parents loved to entertain, and as a young boy, he would sneak out of bed at night to listen from the top of the stairs to the laughter and merriment rising above the smell of secondhand smoke. Next question then would be, again, what type of behavior was consistently modeled for young Henry by those closest to him? As noted, as a young boy, he could see the drinks flowing downstairs. He could hear the laughter lasting into the early morning hours. And he was, of course, shaped by this. He looked at his parents' behavior and he associated rewards with alcohol use. The laughter and camaraderie and friendships were all in the equation of alcohol consumption for Henry. And the heavier their consumption, the more rewards there were. Entering his preteen and teen years, Henry saw this continue as his older brother started hosting high school parties in their basement. Again, this modeled behavior continued on. Again, the behavior that was modeled was one of alcohol consumption and binge drinking. Henry saw how popular his older brother was in school, and he associated that with the parties. Popularity was a reward for Henry. And since all those rewards outweighed the cost of drinking, he, of course, engaged in that behavior. Fast forward to Henry himself now being in high school. Now it's a young Henry who is considering hosting the parties in his parents' basement. What are some of the perceived rewards for Henry? Well, popularity is a huge reward for juveniles. Affirmations from his peers. So now we have both inside and outside rewards for Henry. That is, the rewards he gives himself and the rewards others give him. And what about getting drunk itself? Yeah, of course, this is also a reward. Sometimes the act we engage in and of itself can be a reward. The rewards of this behavior come, again, from both internal and external sources. Internally, Henry enjoys the feeling of being popular, of acceptance, of belonging. Again, all rewards that we give ourselves. And the cost? Well, he's young, so his hangovers are nearly non-existent at this point. So that's a small cost. Cleaning up the mess the next day? The threat of his grades slipping? Yep, all cost. But on balance, the rewards outweigh the cost. So Henry continues in that behavior. Now, eventually, over the years, this feedback loop continues over and over and over. And eventually, Henry begins to develop several cognitive characteristics. By cognitive characteristics, we mean those axioms that we hold deep down inside, those beliefs that buoy our thoughts and feelings, our sort of mantras, if you will. For Henry, his cognitive characteristics are, you have to drink to have a good time, or let's happy hour somewhere, or work hard, party harder. Which brings us eventually to our criminal offense. Henry was drinking and driving the night of his fleeing police in a motor vehicle arrest. And of course, his risk assessment reflects high risk in that subsection of alcohol and drug use and history. And his case plan will undoubtedly address that issue. Now, from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, though, the question should really simply boil down to, how can we tilt the balance of cost and rewards that, for as long as Henry can remember, tilted in favor of the rewards of alcohol consumption over the cost? Back to the research, looking at this from a theoretical standpoint, and again, this is directly from the great text, The Psychology of Criminal Conduct by Bateman and Andrews. They note occurrences of deviant and non-deviant behavior are under antecedent and consequent control. Bam! They also note the probability of an occurrence is due to variations in signaled rewards and cost for the occurrence. Double bam. Translation: it is not all about increasing the cost of criminal behavior, CJ professionals. It is as much about increasing the rewards for pro-social behavior. I would love to hear from you professionals out there to let me know how you or your agency go about this. That is to say, not just playing whack-a-mole with risk factors, but replacing those risky thoughts and behaviors with pro-social thoughts and behaviors. Okay, back to Henry. Yes, the cost of his behavior is evident. Loss of freedom, the cost of being on probation supervision, the stigma of all that, that's a cost. The cost he gives himself, well, it's when he beats himself up over his drinking, his now chronic hangovers, the relationships that his drinking has cost him. What are some rewards for sobriety that we could augment, though? That is, how can we tilt that balance? Or put another way, how can we reverse engineer this criminogenic variable? That, my friends, is what effective case planning is all about.
A quick break from the show to give a shout out to our friends at APHIS, the American Institute for the Advancement of Forensic Studies. APHIS is a professional organization dedicated to uniting the forensic communities of criminal justice, education, law, medicine, and psychology. APHIS is a leader in building relationships within the forensic community, locally and nationally. The mission of the American Institute for the Advancement of Forensic Studies is to provide quality education, training, consultation, and research in the forensic studies to professionals and students. APHIS is a leader in connecting members with one another to help facilitate professional growth, increased competency, and awareness in forensic mental health studies. For details as to upcoming training events, webinars, or publications, please visit them at www.aiafs.com. And now, back to the show.
Again, the point I was trying to make with Henry is that his origin story does not begin on the date of his offense. Just like if you are a probation or parole officer or correctional professional or criminal justice practitioner, our clients' origin stories or backstories don't begin with their offense narrative. It begins much earlier than that. Again, those risk factors, those criminogenic needs are accrued over a lifetime. I chose just there to illustrate that via alcohol, drug risk factors. But again, we could look at all criminogenic domains ranging from family marital, education, employment, leisure, recreation, even criminal thinking, and again, sort of reverse engineer how those risk factors were accrued over a lifetime. We could, for example, look at our client, Patrick Bateman. We showed you a glimpse of a desisted Patrick Bateman previously on this podcast. Well, let's briefly go back in the time machine and see what some of the predicates to his criminal trajectory were. We know he was on supervision for the offense of second-degree assault, but again, his origin story goes back to the date of offense, or it's previous to the date of offense, I should say. What was the stimulus condition for a young Patrick growing up? Well, I would contend violence was likely present in his home as he was growing up as a child. His family may have been involved in crime. There was abuse in the household as Patrick grew up. He often saw his violent father screaming and yelling at his mother, and his mother acquiescing to those demands. As Henry grew older in school, he becomes a bully. He uses violence and threats of violence to get his way with other students. And Patrick enjoyed being the tough guy in school and being able to cut corners via violence. So things like not paying for lunches, other kids doing his homework. The rewards that he was getting were feelings of power and being in control. More often than not, young Patrick gets his way. Again, the source of these rewards come from inside and outside. He personally gave himself a lot of rewards. As I mentioned, he enjoyed those feelings of power and control. Externally, his father is proud of his son for keeping women in line and keeping them in their place and not letting them talk shit to him. The source of that reward was external or interpersonal. So again, you can see on balance, there were more rewards than cost for Patrick's behavior, his bullying and aggressive behavior as a young man. And over time, this feedback loop continued. Now, of course, there were some cost. He may attract looks from others when he has domestic outburst in public. There may be occasional complaints from his girlfriend as to his violent behavior towards her. And, he may feel the rare tinge of guilt about how he feels towards abusing and beating her. But again, on balance, more rewards than cost. So of course, this feedback loop continues. These behaviors become almost automatic, and that leads up to his offense of, assaultive behavior outside the red carpet bar that we hear about in his offense history. But again, the point I'm making here is Patrick didn't wake up one day deciding to be an assaultive individual. These criminogenic factors are accrued over a lifetime. Now, for Patrick, as we heard in our desisted Patrick Bateman episode a few weeks ago, the rewards for prosocial behavior eventually outweighed the cost, and that scale was permanently tilted. If you listened just last week, you heard me note that we owe it to our clients and our stakeholders to get outside of our established, if you will, evidence-based practice comfort zones, or put another way, try to look at how we build on those practices. For example, cognitive behavioral interventions are a huge part of the Risk-Need-Responsivity model. If you speak with cognitive behavioralists in corrections who are really looking to build a better mousetrap, they will tell you that one aspect of cognitive behavioral interventions that we underutilize is the emotional regulation aspect of it. Yes, it's all about cognitive restructuring, but if clients cannot slow their thoughts down and get from the emotional part of their brain to the frontal lobe so some problem solving can take place, we kind of spinning our wheels. And hey, what is mindfulness all about, folks? Slowing down, getting emotion under control. Hello, yoga. You see my point here, folks? Let's try to look more broadly here at what works and resist that urge to say, well, it's not an established evidence-based practice, so I'm not even going to dabble with that. Again, science is ever evolving. Space practices are always evolving. So again, we owe it to our clients, our stakeholders, and to ourselves, quite frankly, to keep an open mind for the next big thing on the horizon. Back next week with a fresh episode. Our scheduled guest is David Breakspear. David is going to be joining us from the UK. He is a former prisoner, prison reform campaigner. He's a TEDx speaker. He is director at Starting Step. He is going to share his lived experience with us, which we always love hearing those. So this is an episode you're not going to want to miss, folks. Trust me. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices or implementation, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New, fun images and videos are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. We are also on Twitter at Crim Media Group. That's CRM, Crim Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. Merchandise is available. Reach out if you're interested. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the show. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And remember, folks, there's no them. There's only us. Tired of those pesky risk factors? Fed up with those nagging periods of reoffending? Just can't seem to keep on the straight and narrow? Then try CriminoGuard. CriminoGuard is our patented repellent against criminogenic need. Criminogard is effective against the risk factors of delinquent past, dysfunctional family relationships, substance misuse, lack of pro-social leisure activities, deficits around education and employment, negative peers, pro-criminal attitude, and a history of antisocial personality pattern. Simply apply Criminogard at the onset of delinquent behavior and when actuarial risk assessment warrants application. Criminogard works by attacking criminogenic need at the source while buffering against future risk. Inspired by general personality and cognitive social learning theory, Criminogard identifies criminogenic need at its source. Then our top secret byproducts mimic pro-social modeling to elicit the onset of pro-social behavior. Once the costs for antisocial behavior outweigh the rewards, users begin seeing reductions in criminal deeds. Criminogard is available in regular, mint, or jasmine scent. Find Criminogard at all quality vendors, shops, and strip malls. Criminogard is not a substitute for proven evidence-based practices. Criminogard may cause mild discomfort or skin rash. In case of continued maladaptive behavior, users should subject themselves to proven core correctional practices. Criminogard has failed to result in significant effect sizes in recidivism reduction. Buyer beware, not sold in Canada.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, training opportunities, or to contact the host, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Click on the Contact Us tab in the upper right-hand side of the page. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.